Hi, today I'm going to talk about The Lord of the Rings Online, an MMORPG that's been around for almost 2 decades. In that time, the industry has changed its face more than once. Some online games blew up and disappeared, others tried to reinvent the genre, and some adapted to new player habits. And with all that in mind, it's especially interesting to look at a project that didn't just survive, but is still growing and getting updates. Especially because this is the first episode of my new series, MMO Check-Up. In this series, I'll do a simple health check on different MMORPGs, how alive the game is, how it feels today, what the content looks like, and whether it's even worth your time in 2026. Let me be upfront, I'm not a hardcore Tolkien fan. I've seen Peter Jackson's movies, but I'm definitely not the type who knows the lore by heart and rereads the books every year. And that's exactly why it was interesting for me to jump into LOTRO with the eyes of a regular player, not as a diehard fan willing to forgive anything for the sake of favorite places and characters, but as someone judging it by the same standards as any modern online game. Over the last few years, the MMORPG market has gotten extremely competitive. Players are constantly tempted with modern graphics, fast progression, and aggressive retention systems. Next to that, old-school games can feel heavy and slow. The Lord of the Rings Online launched back in 2007, which, by today's standards, is basically archaeology. Since then, it's gone through multiple MMO generations, switched to a free-to-play model, received dozens of major updates, and adjusted its direction more than once. The game was originally developed by Turbine, and later the project moved under Standing Stone Games, the team that still supports and develops it today. And this isn't some museum piece kept online only for veterans. The game still gets content updates, new story chapters, new regions of Middle-earth, and various improvements and technical fixes. The developers are clearly focused on keeping the project alive long-term, modernizing it from the inside while trying not to break its classic foundation. One of the biggest technical changes in recent years is the move to 64-bit servers and shifting part of the infrastructure closer to European players. For an older MMORPG, that matters a lot. Controls feel more responsive, delays are lower, and overall stability feels noticeably better. Your first steps in The Lord of the Rings Online start in the opening zone, and it's not just a quick, throwaway prologue. It's a full onboarding segment. The game eases you into the basics, introduces the combat, the interface, and the quest flow. The pacing is very old school, like those computer class lessons back in the day where they explained how to use a mouse. There are plenty of quests. Alongside the usual kill and collect tasks, you'll run into story chains and small scripted moments. But one weakness shows up almost immediately: navigation. Quest markers often aren't very clear, important NPCs don't always stand out, and sometimes you end up running in circles trying to figure out, okay, where exactly do I pick this up and where am I supposed to go? It's funny the first couple of times, but it gets tiring pretty fast. At the same time, the game can surprise you with small details you wouldn't expect from an MMO this old. For example, shooting while moving. If you attack on the run, your accuracy and effectiveness drop. It sounds minor, but it actually changes how fights play out. You start thinking about where to stop, how to position, and when it's worth taking the risk and firing while moving. Loot works in an unusual way too. Items go straight into a separate interface window where you can take what you want and trash the junk. It's convenient, but personally, I still prefer when a rare drop actually shows up on the ground and you physically pick it up off the enemy. So overall, the first few hours can feel slow and a bit heavy, especially if you're used to modern MMORPGs that constantly guide you and push you forward. But once the prologue ends and you step into the Shire, the scale of the world really starts to hit. Wide open spaces, familiar vibes, that sense of travel, and that's the moment LOTRO starts pulling you in and showing why people still love it. The biggest strength of The Lord of the Rings Online is, without exaggeration, that it's one of the most expansive and detailed digital versions of Middle-earth ever created. The developers didn't just throw familiar names onto a map. They tried to build a world that feels whole and alive, where every region has its own context, history, and mood. And because of that, LOTRO often makes you want to just exist in the world rather than constantly grind. What stands out the most is the scale. Long view distances, wide open landscapes, and a lot of attention to small environmental details. You look at the horizon and realize that place in the distance isn't just a painted background. You can actually go there. Every region is a full game zone with its own quest chains, side stories, and local narratives that help expand your sense of the world. The atmosphere plays a huge role too. The weather changes, day turns into night, the music is calm and unobtrusive, and the ambient sounds are always present around you. In moments like these, LOTRO stops feeling like a typical MMORPG and becomes more of an interactive journey, where sometimes you just stop, look around, and enjoy that sense of being on the road. Yes, technically the graphics are clearly dated, and there's no hiding that. But the art direction and environmental design still carry the visuals surprisingly well. On the surface, the combat system in The Lord of the Rings Online feels very familiar. There are 12 classes, each with 3 specializations, and even early on it's pretty clear which ones focus on damage, tanking, or support. Talents, racial passives, and the legendary weapon system give you a lot of room to shape your character. It doesn't feel like you just pick one correct build and forget about it. It's more like gradually building your character around your preferred playstyle, whether that's solo play, PvE groups, or a specific role in dungeons. Some classes also have genuinely unique mechanics. In LOTRO, you'll find systems where it's not just about what buttons you press, but the order you press them in. Certain skill combinations trigger different effects, unlock new attacks, or enhance control and defense. At its core, though, the combat is still classic tap-target gameplay, similar to World of Warcraft, but with a slower and more deliberate pace. Positioning, proper timing of abilities, and understanding your skill set really matter. For players who enjoy thoughtful PvE, that's actually a plus. The game rewards careful play and planning. Over the years, LOTRO has accumulated a huge amount of PvE content. There are dungeons for different level ranges, raids of various sizes, and separate story-driven instances. There's genuinely a lot to do. Many of these instances are tied directly to important locations and events from the world, which makes them feel less like routine farming and more like participating in the larger story of Middle-earth. Another strong feature is the difficulty and scaling system. The same instance can be played at different challenge levels depending on your group and how tough you want the experience to be. Because of that, older dungeons don't turn into abandoned museum pieces that players only revisit for nostalgia. There's still a reason to run them, and the game doesn't pressure you into feeling like the real game only begins after you reach max level. Progression itself is a long journey, designed more for months of relaxed play rather than a weekend sprint. LOTRO encourages you to explore the world slowly, following storylines, traveling through regions, picking up side activities, and gradually building your experience. Endgame content does exist and it matters, but it doesn't overshadow the leveling process. For some players, that's a huge advantage because you can move at your own pace. For others who prefer fast MMOs where the goal is to reach raids as quickly as possible, the pace might feel too slow. PvP in LOTRO works in a fairly unusual way through a system called player versus monster player. Instead of traditional arenas or faction wars, players can actually take the side of the dark forces and control monsters. It's a separate mode with its own progression system, roles, and abilities. Monsters level up differently and essentially function as their own type of character. Because of that, PvP here is asymmetric and heavily team-oriented, where understanding both sides of the fight becomes important. But LOTRO isn't the kind of game where everything revolves around combat. It also has a strong set of non-combat activities. Crafting and professions remain useful even at higher levels, and crafted gear and consumables are genuinely valuable. On top of that, the game offers housing and more relaxed activities like fishing and farming. The result is a balance that's pretty rare in modern MMORPGs. If you want, you can spend your evening running dungeons and raids, or you can focus on crafting, decorating your house, or just doing slower activities, and both approaches feel like legitimate ways to play the game. The Lord of the Rings Online uses a hybrid free-to-play model, and by modern standards, it's surprisingly generous. A large portion of the base content, up to around level 95, is available for free. That's hundreds of hours of gameplay, meaning new players can try the game, get used to its pace and systems, and only then decide whether they want to spend money. The premium currency, LOTRO points, can be earned not only with real money but also through in-game achievements. In theory, that means you can unlock quest packs and even expansions just by playing. In practice, it does take time and patience, but the important thing is that the game doesn't put free players in a hard pay or leave situation. The VIP subscription works more like a convenience package. It speeds up progression, gives experience bonuses, removes certain restrictions, and generally makes the experience smoother. In spirit, it's similar to the model used in the Elder Scrolls Online. You can absolutely play for free, but the subscription makes things more comfortable and saves time. The interface in LOTRO is probably the thing that most clearly shows the game's age. It looks outdated and, by modern standards, a bit clunky. Lots of windows, lots of small elements, and a very dense amount of information on screen. This becomes especially noticeable on 2K and 4K monitors, where the text and buttons can get so small that at first you find yourself squinting at the screen and getting tired pretty quickly. The good news is that the interface is highly customizable. You can move panels around and rearrange them to fit your preferences, and more importantly, the game supports plugins and UI mods that can make everything feel much more comfortable and familiar. There are also scaling tools that help a lot on higher resolutions and make the interface easier to read. So there's a bit of a paradox here. The default UI might turn some players away, but if you spend a little time adjusting it, the experience becomes noticeably more comfortable. If you judge the game strictly as a modern MMORPG, without giving it any credit for its age or its connection to the universe, it can definitely feel slow and sometimes a bit awkward. Leveling is deliberate, the combat is classic tap target and feels fairly heavy, and the interface occasionally reminds you that you're playing something built in a very different era. But if you give the game a little time, it becomes clear why it's still alive. LOTRO doesn't win people over with technology or speed, it wins with scale and atmosphere. This isn't the kind of MMO you log into for 2 hours just to clear daily quests. It feels more like a long fantasy journey where you gradually live through your character's story, travel across a huge world, get pulled into quest chains, and sometimes just stop to take in the scenery, watch the weather change, and enjoy the vibe of Middle-earth. And the further you go, the more you start to feel the depth of its PvE content. The sheer number of instances, raids, storylines, and activities that have built up over the years. So the real question of whether it's worth playing today comes down to one simple thing: what you want from an MMORPG. If you're looking for a modern game with fast-paced action combat, minimal downtime, and cutting-edge graphics, LOTRO probably isn't going to be the right fit. But if you enjoy slower PvE adventures, if you see leveling as a journey rather than an obstacle, and especially if you care about Tolkien's world, then LOTRO can be incredibly easy to get pulled into. It offers a sense of traveling through a vast universe that very few MMOs manage to capture even today. And if you're willing to play by its rules, it can easily give you many hours of enjoyment. The Image Game Channel was with you. Have a nice day.